Um, Since we're running a little later, it is 6:52, and this is the Smart Growth Committee meeting for Westchester Borough Council. I'm Nicole Shimona, your chair, and I'm here with Bernie Flynn and Lisa Dorsey. Any announcements that need to be made? All right, seeing none. Any comments, suggestions, petitions by residents in attendance regarding items not on the agenda? All right, seeing none. All right, Sally, you're up.
Good evening. Okay, September report. As you know, September was a difficult month for us in building and housing. So I thank you in advance for your understanding. Items of interest, land development applications. We have 250 East Market Street. That is coming again before the Planning Commission this month in October. Zoning Hearing Board, they held a hearing on September 23rd for the Michaels Organization special exception application. They're going to issue a decision here on October 28th. HARB, the September meeting was held on the 26th, and I have 3 items later to present this month for approval. In regard to the statistics for last month, we conducted 38 rental inspections. We issued 92 permits. We had 11 property maintenance cases reported, 14 disruptive conduct reports received, 14 citations issued, 0 points assigned, and 8 trash tickets issued.
One question for you. Can you remind me, the Michaels Organization, which one is that one?
5 North Adams across the
Okay,
street.
okay.
The official title is the Michaels Organization.
Okay, there's Knox, there's the, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a fair
Okay,
question.
Thanks. Okay. All right, so similar, you heard the conversation in the public safety meeting. So the hope is, you know, now that you guys are gaining traction, that we start to see something that kind of consolidates all that's happening and kind of helps to show us a trail of, you know, the time frame, you know, and as Sean said, understood that it may take 6 to however many, or 2 to 6 weeks or something like that. But if there's a way we can get something that kind of shows the full cycle that's happening and where things tend to end up, that would be
Right.
great.
Yeah, we are at the mercy of the court. I think 2 weeks is optimistic. It's usually a couple, at least 2 months. But you know, we will track them in the court dates. We have not had a court date in the past several weeks. And we have one upcoming in November, but that's for property maintenance. So the other ones have not hit with trial dates yet.
Okay, yeah, and that completely understood.
Right.
So if we can like build out the shell of what the report will look like, then it'll be easy to just plop the information in once you start getting it. Does that make sense? Like a table?
Just let us know what you're looking for in terms of the report. I thought this was the report.
Yeah, I can share with you kind of what's going on in my head. All right, yeah, that works.
I do have a question about the rotation of the 4 large properties. When will they start coming to the end of their time when they're going to come to council for final approval? So we can start capitalizing on the tap-in fees?
Mhm.
Because we heard last night that the tap-in, the sewer lines are pretty much maxed out in the southeast area.
Right,
And we need the tap-in fees to start repairing
right.
the line in Maple. So we have Mitch's Gym that's been sitting there for forever. We have Rubenstein's, we
we've-
have
Yeah.
Burger King and Knox.
So 250 East Market Street, we have an extension till November 20th currently.
What's the extension mean? Well, I don't know.
The
what that
extension
means.
means council, the applicant has granted council an extension to issue a decision on the land development plan. It actually works backwards. The applicant has to grant the extension. You think we would grant the extension, but it doesn't work that way. The applicant has to grant the borough the extension. 410 South High has also granted us an extension to the end of November. I don't have the exact date, but it's right around the time of 250 East Market. And, if issues aren't resolved by then and not fully vetted by the Planning Commission, we could have further extensions.
Okay, and to what point, Mr. Metrick and Sally, at what point is the developer required to pay the tap-in fees?
It's at time of plan recording. So even though you issue final plan approval, like you did, like the Borough Council did, sorry for using the word you, when Borough Council voted to approve final plan resolution for 611 East Niels, that doesn't mean we got the tap-in fee the next day. We get the tap-in fee upon the applicant recording that plan with the county. And usually that comes when they are ready to spend the money, build the project. And they can sit on it for a long time. And I think that even though the MPC has a limit on how long you can wait before you start a plan, I think case law has pushed that timing out quite a distance from final plan approval.
Thank you.
Right. Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, new business, quarterly report presented by John O'Brien, downtown Westchester. Oh, sorry. Come on up. What did I miss the old business too?
The minutes.
The minutes, yes, but also then the mayor wanted to come up.
So I had questions for Sally. You have not mentioned in quite a while now the status of the property where Davis Oil used to be in the second ward. You have overgrown weeds there. You have what looks like a desolate place. Certainly, it doesn't seem as if they're being cited for anything that's happened, and yet it's a blight in the neighborhood that continually gets overlooked. And I'd like to know if you've looked at it, if you've been made aware of it, and what will happen. Okay, because I have mentioned it a couple of times to a couple of people. So I'm mentioning it to you. And also, I wanted council to be aware of, we have a rental, looks like illegal student rental on Darlington Street in the borough. And it's been brought to my attention, and we did send a letter to housing. And so we need some action on that as well.
The letter gives
That was recent. That was just yesterday.
Yes, it sounds familiar. I think I did the letter myself. The property owner has 30 days to respond to that letter and prove to the borough that the allegation is untrue. If they choose not to do that, the next step is the borough would issue a citation and begin going to court, taking the property owner to court. And as we know, that could take several months. But that is the procedure. I spoke with the solicitor. The borough actually doesn't have the authority or the jurisdiction to initiate evictions. So we let the property owner know, this is the second disruptive conduct report. Your tenant is due to be evicted. You need to evict your tenant. And so far, I've done that once, and the property owner immediately said, okay, absolutely, complied. Per our lease, it takes 60 days to evict a tenant. And again, I ran that by the solicitor. We abide by that. Like, we don't have any jurisdiction what's on the lease. So if it takes 60 days per someone's lease with their landlord to be evicted, then it takes 60 days. So it's not I think there's some confusion, like that the borough can go in and evict students and they have to be out immediately. I just want to dispel that. It's a really involved legal process that would not be initiated by us, but eventually we take the property owner to court to force their hand to do the eviction, but we don't do the eviction ourselves.
Yeah, and I think all that this keeps coming up.
Right.
People in my ward keep talking about it. Mayor's come up and said something. If you do the math, the university sent us some data, and there's probably, if we've got 1,600 approved student beds, we probably have somewhere, rough estimate, because, you know, they're trying to collect data. It's not perfect, what have you, but probably
Sure.
another 1,000 students at least living in the borough somewhere, some probably legally if they're just one person, and a bunch probably as well,
Mhm.
not legally. And the question is, I mean, if we've got, let's just cut that number in half. Let's say we've got 500 extra student housing units across the borough. I mean,
That are
this is a
legal.
conversation that are illegal, right?
Right.
Like what, we don't have a great plan. I can tell you that right now. Like we don't, I don't know what the plan's going to be. I don't, and I know the university's not building tons of housing
Right.
to accommodate all these students. So,
I mean, we've
it's
been
a
receiving a
conversation.
lot of illegal student complaints lately.
Yeah.
But the process is to send a letter. I mean, I have one code enforcement officer, and he doesn't, you know, the solicitor recommended, you know, he could do surveillance. But I mean that, you know, I'm sorry, he's not trained to do surveillance, nor do we have the time for our only code enforcement officer to do surveillance all day. So the option is to send the notice of violation letters and put it on the property owner to prove to us that they're not students. Because we don't have police authority. We can't go in there and demand to see anything.
So I don't
That's the
know the
reality.
answer to this puzzle, but
That's
there's
the
a
truth of the
thing.
situation.
It's a,
It's done through, you know, letters and enforcement, and eventually taking the property owner to court to, into, you know, force a hand at eviction.
Yeah, and again, as long as we're talking about this too, I do think that we need to keep in mind that, you know, the people entering into the contract with the property owner to rent the property, that property owner needs to get a license from us. They need to send a tenant landlord form in that's an form of an affidavit that says, tell us who's living in the property, whether they have vehicles, give us the license plates, and then tell us whether they're students or not, and whether this is a student home. And we check to see if it's a legal student home at that point. So for somebody to put tenants into a property knowingly falsify a record, and then you bring,
I mean, it happens. It's happening all over
you
the
bring-
place. I mean, that, I don't speculate that it's not happening. That is 100%
that's not
happening.
where I'm taking my point. You bring these children, you know, I have a 21-year-old, they're still children, into these homes, and they live there and they do things that they probably shouldn't do. And then they find out that they've been rented a place illegally and they have to be evicted. And and the only thing we do as a town, because it's in our ordinance, is we give them 5 points. And that's only halfway to a revocation of a license. And you've put 2, 3, sometimes 4 people out on the street who really honestly didn't know any better and thought they were doing the right thing and legally.
I think some of them do
Occupied
know
something.
too, because in the community campus committee meeting, Lexi will say that students come to her because they know they're in illegal housing, but it was the only housing they could get, and so they took it. So, and they're afraid. I mean, that, because they're afraid of being evicted because they know where they are. Just so you know, some of them do know that they're in illegal housing too.
I'm just kind of putting on my policymaker hat for a minute and saying, I wish the policy were a little harder on the property owner in this particular instance, because I think it's hurting 2 people. It's hurting, you know, it's hurting 2 things. The residents who, and we've set a policy that there is going to be a de facto finite amount of student homes in the borough. We have people violating that. That's an issue. And now you have residents in our borough, the students, who have to probably move out.
And I think, so what what are you thinking, Sean? Because right now we have the policy to try to get a path forward to evicting the students, but are you saying that there needs to be more fines for the owners, or where's your head going?
If you're curious where my head is going, is there should be automatic revocation, suspension of rental license for a determined amount of time if you knowingly rent to students and you don't have the zoning authority to do that. You don't operate a student home. Period.
I mean, I agree with
Alright.
Mr.
Because they
Metrick.
can go right back and rent to, they could rent to another group of students knowingly.
And
If
probably they
get
do.
away with it for another 6 months. And if that happens, they're into the next rental cycle and who cares? It's just 5 points.
And most of the students and their parents do not know that there's even a student rental home ordinance. They're trusting the landlord. They have a lease. They don't know to look at borough code to see if it's an approved student rental. So,
Okay, so who do we talk to on this one then? Kristen?
yeah, it's Kristen.
Okay.
Do you mind if I answer the mayor? Because I've been in contact with solicitor on the Davis Oil.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Mayor, a couple of things,
I just wanted to, just to follow up.
okay.
Ironically, this particular property, it looks like it's Immaculata students. Ironically, because of the flag. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, yes. And secondly, it came to my attention because the neighbors were feeling threatened. And so there is a report on these students who apparently, are part of the baseball team at Immaculata. So, yeah, so they are students, and it looks like perhaps it may be an illegal rental, and it does need to be addressed. But go ahead, you were going
Okay,
to say
the,
about Davis Oil?
Yes, in the past week, I reached out to Kristen Camp because I drove past the site over at Davis Oil. And then Mr. Oh, yeah, well, I go past it quite a bit, but I decided to really peek in there to see what was going on. And Mr. Travis actually joined me on the email thread. And it's a very legalese, and Mr. Metric even joined in. It's a very legalese type of thing that's going on over here at the Davis Oil. Because we were concerned about the cleanup, about being able to see all the trash over there and the high weeds and everything that's going on. And, I asked Kristen Camp, who owns the property, I asked her if we could go after the Davis Oil people legally. Because, I just figured, they made the mess. Let's see if they had some pockets. So the estate still is owned by the property, the Davis people, but subject to the DEP loans for cleanup. There are a 3-party agreement in place. And I believe the estate, as the seller, the DEP, is taking part in the control of the cleanup. The buyer that's interested wants to put a self-storage site over there, self-storage garages. But that's a ways down the road. And Kristen couldn't put her hand on the exact agreement. And then I asked her whether we could start fining the Davis Oil people. Well, Kristen told us that in the past, the borough cited the estate for violations of property maintenance code. And the district court was not willing to enter into a judgment against them because the estate is insolvent. So the only thing by writing citations to the Davis Oil and to the site is just a paper trail for us to make us feel good. And the district court doesn't look like they're going to be backing up our request to have them clean the site up. But that was October 7th that we had conversations about it. And The DEP has confirmed that any assets at the Davis estate, they are now being paid to the DEP because the DEP has taken over the remediation of the property. He also indicated the DEP is not made whole with all the costs of remediation. He also agreed that the analysis that there is no cause of action for toxic tort against the borough. Because I was asking to go after the Davis Oil people, but the borough itself, they said the borough itself was never harmed, even though that site's harmed. So that's what we found out on October 7th. Sally can, do what we need to do to have a paper trail, but hopefully the district court will change its mind. And I don't know who they're going to try to get money out of because the DEP won't pay it. And the property owner is basically in default. So is that the way you read and understood the situation, Mr. Metrick? Yeah, so it's an unsightly thing that we can't do anything about until somebody does something about it. It's unfortunate, so. Well, Mr. Metrick, you can chime in. From what our solicitor said, basically the DEP is the people that actually, for all intents and purposes, owns the property, even though they don't own the property because they're doing the remediation. I don't know. Last night I asked who Mr. DEP was, and everybody laughed at me because everybody says DEP. We can probably reach out to whoever's in charge of that site and ask them if they would have somebody from the DEP clean up, the weeds and the trash and stuff. But we don't have any standing on the site as it stands now. Is that the way you remember the response, Mr. Metrick?
I'm with the borough. There were buildings on the site that have been removed that were a hazard. And the fencing was made more permanent on the site, but I admit it hasn't changed much in a long time now. And we're part of that email I sent around to council and the mayor about the timing of the cleanup. It took 4 months for that information to get back to us on that.
So let me,
About the cleanup. Let's see.
so this while you're looking for that, why this conversation began well before even Sally came, because even when I think there were fines against the property around $15,000, we were told it wasn't even worth going to court for. So the fact that they went to court for it surprises me, because I remember clearly them saying they weren't going to court for it. But I appreciate, I have spoken to Mr. Metrick about this. I have spoken to our ward representative, Brian Travis, about this, spoken to Sally about this. I cannot appreciate the fact that no one will stay on DEP about this, because if you were looking at this every day, you would be making calls every day on the hour, Mr. Flynn, and so would anybody else on this council. This is unacceptable, and we cannot allow this to continue to DEP or whoever else gets ready to decide to restore this property to how it should look in the neighborhood. The weeds are as tall as you, maybe not as tall as me, but as tall as you, and something has to be done. This is unacceptable, period.
And I do have a follow-up
So,
with that for you.
That DEP is in charge, and saying nothing else.
It's like the Wizard of Oz. And I asked that last night because everybody seems to hide behind those 3 letters and no one seems to want to go see who the Wizard of Oz is behind the letters. The buyer spoke to the borough about potential reuse of the self-storage facility. It's unlikely, perhaps, or impossible from a financial point of view. to remediate the site to a residential standard. So no houses probably will ever be there. The buyer has experience with sites like this at Davis Oil, but we're a long way from there.
Can I,
Once the remediation basically hasn't even started yet. Once it's operational, we'll have a better idea of what kind of contaminants will happen there. So
can I ask just a question? Is it within the realm to just like ask them to mow the lawn? It sounds like that could go, or well, mow the weeds, weed whack, whatever, whatever. I haven't been past there in a while, so I don't know exactly. But I mean, is that something that's in our realm to ask and say, you know, we know you got a lot of other stuff going on. We know citing you is, you know, citing if that's not going to really get us anywhere, but is there just like an ask to like do some weed whacking on the regular? Okay, so we can do that.
it's a toxic site sitting there that looks like hell. And the Davis estate is basically broke. The DEP is stepping in because they want to try to clean up the site, the toxic part of it. And then there's a guy or a woman down the road that says, hey, once you get it cleaned up and you can't build anything on it, I could put storage sheds on there. But that's years down the road, and those weeds will be as tall as the mayor at that point. Because they'll be taller than me. So the mayor's slightly taller than me. But Sally, I don't know who Mr. DEP is, because we have the property, well, they're the property owner, but we don't know who to call at DEP to get it done. Maybe Mr. Metrick knows. But, Mr. DEP, no, it's Athens, Georgia. Davis Oil, they are the estate that owns it, and they're not going to talk to you.
Who's the buyer?
I don't know who the buyer is, but I'm sure we have somewhere in your realm over there, the contact for the DEP, because somebody's talking to DEP over there in your area. I don't know. Well, it ain't happening. Yeah, yeah. Mr. Davis, Mr. Davis is not going to come weed whack. I'm straight up. It's a private site that is cycloned in, so I'm assuming the weeds, I'm not assuming, the weeds are behind the cyclone fence and we'd be trespassing. So, yeah, so this is, yeah. Yeah. Hey. Yeah. We're trying. So this is pickleball. I just gave it the ball back.
So,
Good luck.
so I appreciate that, Ms. Slook. Can I suggest that, we do cite them and we keep track of, what those fees are? I know they're not going to be paid, but when they get to the settlement table, if there's $3,000 in fees, then that's $3,000 that they're not going to get at the settlement table, assuming that has not happened yet, right? Exactly.
To do anything, it's fines, interest, accrual, and that will be taken at the settlement table.
That's right.
Yeah, it says here from Christine Camp, it does say that the DEP has liens against the property for cleanup. And of course, they hold first position. So whatever the first position eats up for the sale, but this way, at least, well, maybe not. Maybe, we'll be able to get a better understanding. You can report back to us in a month or two of what's going on. So.
I'll start with this direction she recommends.
All right, and any other comments, questions from anyone in the audience at this point in time as well? All right, then we'll move to old business, the Smart Growth Committee meeting minutes from September 11th, 2024.
Good.
You guys are good? All right. Then we'll move on to new business. Quarterly report presented by John O'Brien, Downtown Westchester.
Good evening, John O'Brien, Executive Director, Downtown Westchester. I'll try and keep this as brief as you would like, I should say, just since the hour grows late. This is a newer feature for us, so I apologies for not submitting this electronically. The report, as we go forward with these, if there's certain items that you want me to report on, please let me know. I can kind of move this report around in any direction that's preferable to the council and to the Smart Growth Committee. So just wanted to go through a couple items of note for council. So next year, the Westchester Business Improvement District, which is our legal name, is up for reauthorization. We're a municipal authority of the borough, so every so often, we've always been on a 5-year increment. We go through a process that's governed by the Neighborhood Improvement District Management Act of the state. That will involve public hearings with council, a comment period for commercial property owners within the proposed district, the millage rate that we'll be proposing to use, as well as our strategic plan. Right now, we are gathering as much input as we can on the strategic plan, on what members of council want to see downtown focused on, what businesses want to see us focused on, what commercial property owners want to see us focused on, and what residents want to see us focused on. So we are hosting with the businesses a virtual town hall next Tuesday at 10 a.m. But we're also going to be rolling out a survey, online survey, and that will be for literally anybody on what they want to see us focus on. My door is also always open for anybody that wants to sit down and have a conversation on what they want to see over the next 5 years in downtown Westchester. The more input, the better, and that makes a stronger strategic plan, which will help guide the organization. So our hope is to start putting together a draft of this strategic plan, because that's the meatiest part of the 5-year plan that we'll submit. Our hope is to have that in early next year, and then we'll begin the clock with council till we eventually get to a point where hopefully we are able to get reauthorized and enter into the municipal services contract with the borough. I did submit my budget request to both the borough manager and the president of borough council. We are this year asking for a slight uptick of an additional $15,000 within our budget as our starting points. Council has always been extremely generous with the organization and has had a line item for since the inception of the bid 24 years ago at $85,000. That has remained relatively unchanged. Well, not relatively, has remained unchanged since the inception. So we are looking, with an additional investment to be able to do more for the downtown. Currently we hired a part-time, what we call a cleaning green associate, who helps us pick up litter on the sidewalks, wash the benches, wash the trash cans, do weeding on the sidewalks in some of our community gardens. We would like to continue that position going forward. Previously, we had a arrangement with local magisterial district justice on doing community service to accomplish those items. She's kind of rolled back from that because she was facing a lot of fraud issues with students. I shouldn't say students, with individuals submitting to her that they had done work for not as much my organization, but other organizations, which they had never done. So she just kind of got tired of operating that way. So we've gone to this paid position piece. We also want to create things like a new banner program on the light poles, especially on the High Street corridor from Chestnut Street South. We want to be able to expand our marketing efforts, especially focusing around retail. We have a great food scene in Westchester, but we also have a very strong retail component, but we don't have the resources necessarily to tell that story as much as I would like us to. So that would be something we'd be looking to do. And then we're also looking to hopefully purchase software program. It's called Placer AI, which they use geo-tracking. You can create a geofence really for a building, a street, for wherever any kind of time period that you would like. And it uses cell phone data tracking to understand how many people are moving in and out of that geofence. So when we do our parades, when we do our street festivals, even right now, we're always just kind of taking a shot in the dark on how many people attended based on just kind of visually, it seems like it's pretty full. But it would be good to get a lot of data around when the usage is of it. You know, we've had conversations, people have approached me about the Gay Street Open Air Market and how that attracts people or doesn't. I don't have a lot of good data around that. This would be an ability to kind of be able to track better data on like events like that if we're getting more people into town, and also where they're coming from. Are they just local residents, or are we attracting people from right outside of the borough or from another county that are coming in for these special events? I mentioned the Clean and Green Fall Associate. I did want to take a second to thank council for your efforts to restructure the special event fee structure. My organization is very supportive. I believe where you landed was a very fair proposal. I know it wasn't the easiest process, but we're very grateful. And with that new fee structure, you're not going to see me coming to you asking for special exceptions for things related to our special event for street closures and items like that. I did want to highlight just some of the upcoming events that we're doing. We're launching our first annual turkey trot. It'll be on Thanksgiving morning. It'll be the normal southwestern route at Church and Market Street. We'll start at 8 a.m. Registration is now open. We do need volunteers for race marshals if there are people who are not interested in racing. So please contact me if you know of anybody, and if the borough can kind of help spread the word, that would be great. Our small business weekend is the following day, Friday, the November 29th through Sunday, December 1st. This is one of the biggest weekends for retail. I know the parking committee did approve for free street level meter parking last night, and we're very thankful for that. But we spent a lot of effort and time around our marketing of that to encourage people to shop local in Westchester and get all your holiday needs here instead of focusing on shopping online at Amazon or the big box stores. You know, investments that you make locally by shopping locally, those dollars stay in your community instead of going to a big national, multinational corporation. And then the other big event that the Downtown Westchester is putting forth is in partnership with the Chester County Art Association, which is our Chris Kindle Market, which is a holiday market. It'll be on Saturday, December 14th. It'll be the 4 blocks of Gay Street from Matlack down to New Street. We have over 90 vendors that are going to be participating. Again, it'll run from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. To give you an idea of the excitement that we're seeing around this event, we already have on our Facebook event over 19,000 people who are interested in this, and that is without any kind of paid advertising. So we haven't boosted the post, we haven't been running ads on Google Ads or in various magazines. So that's just an organic upswelling of people wanting this event. We do want to thank that the Westchester Downtown Foundation will be the presenting sponsor, and that Westchester University and Buckley Bryan law firm have both signed on to be block sponsors for that event. And then finally, 2 new businesses to let council know about in the retail space. Clara May Company, which is on where the greenhouse was on North Church Street. They are a vintage/modern clothing store focusing on women's clothing. And then Tiger Snake Vintage is in the Westchester Commons building across from Ryan's Pub on the 2nd floor. That is also a vintage clothing store as well. So we're expanding the number of different retail offerings that we have, and there are a couple restaurants that are in the pipeline to come in.
So thank you. So I kind of asked for this because we, John had come to all of us, I think, and was saying, he's up for renewal and everything. We started talking. I'm like, well, what have you done? And I was like, well, let's get a quarterly report or something so we can kind of keep track or have a better understanding of all the things that you do for the community. So thank you for the start and everything. And what I want to see is kind of the new stuff that you're doing to bring in, either bring in businesses to the town center, bring in people to go to the businesses like the events. I think you did. Did you start the Chris Kindle or that started at the Art Center?
So that started at the Art Association, and we had conversations with them because they used to always do it the weekend of the Christmas parade. And, you know, for those of us who live on that side of town can tell you that it's absolute gridlock on that Friday night. So they really did not see the attendance there. And we've always wanted to bring one in. It's a great partnership because they have the expertise for the artisans that come in and the special craft vendors. And they also have a great volunteer base that brings in with us. And we can kind of handle the logistics of working with council, the police, public works, you know, raising some of the dollars to help defray those costs. So it's been kind of a win-win. It gives our retail stores the opportunity to get more exposure. Last year, a lot of our local retail stores said they had their single best sales day and since they've opened, and that's businesses that have been around for 10, 15 years, just with that one-day event we did last year. So we're hoping on building on that success this year.
So yeah, so that's, yeah, I'm excited for that. So a couple other things. The $100,000 that you're asking for, you
Yeah.
know, that's something, you know, it'd be good to know what you're going to use it for. Like what
Right.
have you used the 85,000 for? What are you going to use this 100,000 for? How's our money being spent? So that's something that would be great to have
Sure.
in your report, either if you're asking for it or in your report after you've spent it, like.
Sure, and
what
I can
you're
send you, I sent a comprehensive letter to both to the Borough Council President and to Sean. I can share that with the committee that kind of outlines some of those details that we talked about.
Ms. Shimoni's comment, we used to get this pretty regularly, so I'm happy to see it again.
Yeah,
It really
we've
tells,
always, and working with Dana, we always do an annual report, which was, you know, what I inherited when I started this position in 2020. But we're happy to do this quarterly or, you know, every other month or, you know, whatever smart growth would find helpful. We'd be happy to come forward and talk about it.
I'm happy to see it again.
Okay. And one data point I did forget, our commercial vacancy rate right now is about 3.9%. That is something that we keep track of on a monthly basis. When I say the vacancy, that is properties that are for lease. I don't count properties that are currently being worked on with a planned tenant. So if a restaurant's coming in with a build out, we don't count that as a vacant piece within that lease because somebody is going to be inhabiting that property.
So two more questions
Sure.
from me. What's happening with Sterling Pig? Who's going in there?
There is a new tenant that will be coming in very shortly. I think that it's a very cool concept. It'll still be a restaurant. The announcement is going to be in 2 weeks from that property owner, so I don't want to jump the gun on their media plan. But
You know the answer to this, huh?
but I think it'll be something that, you know, residents of all ages will be able to enjoy.
Okay. Shoot, what was the other question? Oh, the Commons.
Yes.
So I thought they were office buildings until maybe a couple of months ago. So I feel like, is this new that there's so much retail in?
It's a little bit
or-
newer. The majority of it is office concept. There are one or two, and they're really kind of offices that are kind of converted as almost like somewhat incubator style. It is a little tougher for retail stores that are operating right now. There are currently 3 different retail operations: a jewelry store, one designer, and Tiger Snake Vintage. Just because of the street exposure. So we've worked with them because they are allowed, according to ordinance, to have like a A-frame sign out when they're open. But they aren't the biggest spaces. So I think, with office space and the rise of work from home, I think they've kind of reimagined what the building could be. And they've allowed some, retail operations within there. The first floor has always been retail in compliance with the retail overlay district.
Yeah, so maybe there's some other ways to help make them successful. I know like there are other towns where they have similar buildings where you go in and there's just different stores and
The difference with this one is like in those other concepts, it's usually like maybe like a warehouse or something that's converted to open stalls, and it creates, a great visual for the customer coming in because it's very open and you can see everything. Because of like the hallways and the stairwells, just the way this building's naturally cut up, it can sometimes be a little harder for people to navigate. So we do work with those companies to get them off the ground. They are on Gay Street, so we did give every one of them the opportunity, if they would have liked it, to set up out front on the street. One is taking advantage of the free space that we offer for the brick and mortar retail businesses in the borough for the Chris Kindle Market. So we try and do those little pieces as well.
All right, those are all my thoughts right now.
And for the
Yes.
members of council that I haven't talked to, I would love to sit down with you about our strategic plan and hear your input for what you want to see over the next 5 years. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any comments, thoughts from those in attendance here? What you guys are, okay. All right. Next item, motion to approve resolution for preliminary subdivision plan 211 Dean Street. The applicants provided a minor lot consolidation and Westchester Planning Commission has recommended approval.
Good evening. My name is Denny Howe. I'm here with Powell Engineering on behalf of Hazley Builders. And I'll stick with the theme of keeping it brief. I'm here tonight for the lot consolidation of 211 Dean Street that you can see on the screens here. The lot appears as though it would be two lots. I'm sorry, it would appear as if it's one lot. However, it is subdivided into two lots. The one lot is about 1,100 square feet, and which is the smaller lot, and the other one is about 5,700 square feet. The intent would be to consolidate the lots together to ultimately build a single-family house. Like you said before, I had met with the Planning Commission at the last meeting, and they recommended approval. I haven't worked through all the details of the home that would be constructed yet. I'm still working that out with Brian Thomas at Hazley Builders, but I'm just working my way through the approval process, which is what ultimately brought me here tonight.
Any questions?
No, I reached out to the chair of planning commission because I couldn't understand what you were trying to do there. And I wanted to make sure that we weren't going to build another apartment building there. And he assured me that the lot is not big enough, to do that type of thing, because we're really sensitive to space now. And then I did ask about an ADU, whether you're planning on putting a garage on either end of the property, I guess the bottom half of the property, whether you're going to put a garage in there and then put an ADU inside there, accessory dwelling unit for living.
So the intent at the moment is that there would be a garage located on the, I guess at the top of the screen on Holly Alley to match the character of the other lots along Holly Alley. But to my knowledge, there's no intent on an accessory dwelling unit. On top of that, there would just be one dwelling located closer to Dean Street that would meet all the required zoning requirements.
Now, the name Denny Howe, the beard's very similar, but the hairstyle is quite different. So are you an imposter or what?
It's the same amount of hair, it's just distributed differently.
I was happy. Thank you.
Yes.
No.
Feels good.
Any questions from those in attendance? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, motion to approve HARB applications. 10 West Bernard Street, sign, 9 North High Street, screening, and 112 South High Street, window replacement.
Yes. Okay. 10 West Bernard Street, the board recommends, HARB recommends approval for the certificate of appropriateness as submitted with the following clarifications. The background color of the sign shall be an off-white color, not bright white. Okay, regarding second application, 9 North High Street, the board recommends approval of a certificate of appropriateness for this application as submitted. And then for 51 Patton Alley, the proposal is exterior renovations. The board does recommend approval for the certificate of appropriateness with the following clarifications. There's 7. I don't know if you want to read them. They are stated in your packet. Okay. And that would be that for the 3.
Any questions?
Nope.
No? All right, we're good.
Thank you.
Any questions from those in attendance here? Okay. Other business, discussion of planning commission recommendation for setbacks.
Good evening, Jim Cherry, Planning Commission. Uh, As requested, we had reviewed, again, these were existing ordinances, but there was the build to line or otherwise the front yard setback, and trying to kind of provide a little more clarity to what the requirements are. And it would really help a lot if there was the visuals. I don't know if you have those or that letter, but I don't need that. I'll just talk in the big picture right now. So there's two items on.
Do you have the visual and the attachment? Yeah. That's not attached to the agenda to.
Okay. So it's a little bit of a complicated issue. So, but I'll break it down into two kind of big picture pieces here. The first one is the build to line or the front yard building setback. And there's some cleaning up or some clarifications within the zoning districts that changes some language that does a established front yard relative to the adjacent properties and provides some parameters to it. So if there's a distance on either side of the property, and it gives a range from basically established buildings and the primary face of the established building. And then there will be, there's some parameters set in there that says we're either allowed to build up to that front face or back to that back face or that average in there. So it just establishes where that front yard actually sits. So if you looked through that, it kind of steps through where there are existing buildings, whether it's vacant buildings and any other pieces that might vary from really simple conditions. So what the desire was to kind of hold and maintain the existing character, hold the street, but maintain the character and scale of the neighborhoods and adjacent buildings. Sometimes there are buildings, I'll just use nudies that are adjacent to 330 Market Street that are set back so far, it kind of loses the character of the street. So it's not necessarily a solution appropriate for an urban setting. Sometimes there are other areas where either one side within the zoning district is being held and the other side might be a switch in zoning, which changes it. So those areas come into discussion points in areas. But the intent here was just to tighten up this language and an existing ordinance to give us something a little more solid to stand on. So I think it makes it easier on that one. We kind of rolled into the discussions in the height overlay districts, especially with these larger buildings, and how they relate to the street and those existing sidewalks. So it's one thing to have the build to line and we're establishing it and we're looking at a 3-story building. But when you're looking at a 5-story building and you only have a 7-foot sidewalk or something, it's how we're addressing that or what we're addressing and looking at the zones of the sidewalk. So you have it now.
What page do you?
Actually, well, I can flush through all the way. We can start back in the beginning of it. Let me just see where we're at. That's the second attachment, that's setbacks urban form. Do you have one that has our letter from the Planning Commission to the Borough Council? Thank you for providing that. Okay, so as we step through, the first paragraph is just outlining, these are the revisions for those two pieces here. As we can scroll up through this. Next page, please. Okay, so this is where we're recommending the ordinance revision to the front yard to change which we're calling established front yard, which we're adding a definition. So that's the front yard building setback used in districts that have established building and lot patterns to preserve existing community character. Dimensions shall be identified using, and then there's a section, computation or established from the front yard. And then we provide that below of how to establish it or the computation. So if we slide to the next page, it gives an example. That first example, A, very simple one. We have two properties either side adjacent to it. When present, use the front yards of the buildings or buildings adjoining the property, new buildings exclusively to match the established front yard, excepting for cases described in the subsections below. So that first one is fairly simple. Where the intent there is that's the front yard. It doesn't mean you have to build up to it, but that's the build to. That's the maximum. The next one down talks to the condition where buildings placed on a lot between two properties with different established front yards. So one's maybe 10 feet, one's 20 feet. That gives us the ability to provide a zone somewhere in that build to area is anywhere from that 10 to 20 feet. That's the intent.
So I have a question on the CI or C1. Excluding open porches or decks screened or unscreened. So how do they factor into this build to?
What we're looking to do is hold the line on the primary face of the primary structure. So you might, if someone's having the build to line, they're trying to maximize their building and they're going out to the front steps of the porch. That's not what we're intending to do. We're looking at the buildings adjacent to it, preserving their views and their sight lines down the blocks. So the primary face of the building structure. So say you have a 3-story brick home and it has a porch in front of it. The surface or the line that we're counting as the front face of the structure is the front face of the primary structure, not an open porch or a railing or a patio or something that's added in front of it.
So could I potentially from a different angle, if I had a new building, would I build to, like using that example, I could potentially build to the 10-foot, like that line, that top line, and then I could put a porch on it, like that goes further out? Or does my porch have to go to that 10-foot, can only go to that 10-foot line?
What do you think?
Does that question make sense?
I think we're talking about the porch.
Tom West, Planning Commission. I'm not sure the code provisions on a new building, if a porch is allowed to encroach into a front yard setback, but it's established by, as Jim said, the primary wall. Sean, do you know offhand if porches are allowed in a front yard setback?
I don't know offhand. I know what you're talking about. I don't know the zoning.
Yeah. We can look into that and
Well,
find out.
We'll get back to you on that with an answer. But there are areas where you're allowed to encroach beyond, whether it's front stoops or stairs, or maybe bay windows or boxes or canopies, things like that, that overhang that line. So, and we don't want to take those away because they add a lot of texture and character to the street. So, and in looking at this, as we go to the next page. Oh, so the bottom one is when you get into more complicated areas where we might throw out a flyer or talk. That's what we were talking about relative to high, low numbers. So that just provides an example on a block with some variations within them of how they should be determining that, and how the planning commission or the zoning or smart growth might be looking out that development. And so it gives it a basis, a little more structured as a starting point to compare the proposed development with these different circumstances for that development. You can't predict every single solitary situation that comes down the road, but these are trying to capture, the bulk of them. So.
If I could, I would just say too, that the request that came to us was to look at the ordinances based on our recent experiences with development reviews. And we saw a lot with this factor here, that the table in the town center and the neighborhood conservation district said the building line or front yard matches adjacent buildings, which is, it's a great concept and it's a great objective, but it doesn't have standards to go by. And there was a lot of meetings and discussions about where is that line, the interpretation. So our thought was to look at other ordinances and other examples to come up with some more definitive standards to try and address that in the situations that are given. But the objective is to make it, as Jim said, consistent with the neighborhood. So it should be matching the adjacent structures, but we wanted to tighten the ordinance up or propose to tighten the ordinance up so the applicants understood where those lines were coming into it. And as the planning commission's reviewing it, or council or borough administration, there's some more standards to hang our hat on. So we're not getting into interpretation so much.
Yeah, because from our perspective, all of these amendments already exist. It's just, I mean, we're just trying to clarify or give a basis to it, to take some kind of that guesswork out of it. After that discussion, so that is what the planning commission made, that was after our discussions and reviews and talks, that's what we were kind of moving forward to amend the existing ordinance in that manner. However, it kind of spilled over, the conversation did, specific to the height overlay districts, the 60 and the 75. So that's where starting into that. And then as we looked at that, and trying to preserve the sidewalks, especially in areas with the desire to have street trees. And when we get into these larger buildings, to give the opportunity for those trees to exist, and also to get light down into, the taller you get in these buildings, we're just trying to allow light down at this street level. So if we scroll to the next page, please. One more. It'll provide the graphic. Okay, so within this, we're also recommending, now these ordinances exist within streetscapes, which is why we provided that. And these, what we're asking to do is to kind of clarify or provide a definition where previously there was a defined of at least 6 feet in width sidewalk. We're asking the developers propose incorporate complete streets and streetscape design criteria into adjacent street alleys improvements per this appendix. So then we're providing this appendix, which gives these based on, I'd say there's block classes. There's different types of blocks and areas within the borough, and not all of them, there wouldn't be a prescribed number, but based on, and they're all within, well, all of these would apply to the HO 60 and 75 areas. It would then kind of help define what we're looking for. And then based on the widths and the zones, you can kind of see the frontage zone, which is the area that gives the opportunity for people to step in and out of a building, to have those stoops that might encroach in onto that sidewalk. But we're not trying to impede on the pedestrian zone. That's the walking area in that center portion of the area. So we have an area that might be 6 to 10 feet wide, or even or smaller, depending on what zone it is. So within I can't see, so I'm going to turn this to here. So within these, it's basically providing between the curb and the building, defining 3 separate zones. So we're calling one the frontage zone, the pedestrian zone, and the amenity zone. The amenity zone is where the street trees, trash cans, benches, signage, that kind of stuff might exist. That's outside of the area of the pedestrian zone. The pedestrian zone is the area that's intended for passerbys to walk. And then the frontage zone, that's where the building can step in and out of it relative to maybe planters or steps that might, so when a door swings open, it's not in the walking path. So both of those, we've provided kind of criteria, and it's based on where it is, what type of building is, what height the building is, and so on. And that's in town center, and what type of road, whether it's an arterial or a collector or a local road. So that's what that matrix, that's what the matrix tells you, that first line across there, town center, arterial, it gives you parameters for that and so on.
Just to elaborate on a couple of points Jim mentioned. When we looked at this second part, streetscapes, beyond the setbacks, and again, our experiences with recent development, large buildings, the front yard setback or building line is good, but it doesn't address a lot of the other variables when you're getting into much bigger scale buildings. So we wanted to look at how do we address the streetscapes, basically which are really important in the borough. And when we looked at this, we went back to the comprehensive plan and looked at strategies in the comprehensive plan, and it really stresses to promote the streetscapes quite a bit. And it talks about 2 things: complete streets, which is basically a more common term is multiple modes of transit, not just cars. And that's an important thing that's stressed in the comprehensive plan, which we have brought into this. And the other concept in the comprehensive plan is context-sensitive development. And it's a fancy term for basically saying that the solutions that you have should be based on the type of land use fabric, whether it's downtown or edges or residential areas is one factor. The other one is the kind of road that's running through it. So it's the road terms are arterial, collector, and local. So we've kind of looked at the comprehensive plan and said, how can we provide solutions for the streetscapes to protect the scale of them, to protect, I mean, when you look at a lot of things about what makes a community really valuable is it's walkable, it's pedestrian oriented, it's got a lot of, it's considered an asset. A lot of events and activities happen there. And when we went beyond the front yard the building setback, we looked at what are some of the aspects we do. And we looked in the ordinances. We already have a lot of great provisions for streetscapes and complete streets in the subdivision ordinance and in zoning. Unfortunately, they're not always applied consistently. A lot of times they're viewed as would be nice to do. So part of the ordinance language is to stress that all of those things about streetscapes and complete streets, it's not should be doing it, it shall do it. And the applicants need to say why they can't do it. And then the second part is the zones on the graph up there are addressing this context development for the pedestrian areas. So it's based on not one size fits all. So right now our ordinances say if it's a sidewalk, I think they're 4 to 6 feet in residential and 5 feet in commercial zones. And it's really, if you look at these numbers, it's addressing the middle part, what we think of the sidewalk, but not where the street trees go and the lights and benches and things like that. Those things are maybe not as important in the outlying residential areas, but when you're putting a 60 or 75-foot building up and the street is in some cases only several feet wide, you don't have room for these things. So when we looked at it and what the comprehensive plan strategies were saying, we tried to incorporate those into these ordinance changes and follow through. So the main things are to enforce what we already have on the books, which is a lot of good provisions, then really call out these zones and make sure that when we're reviewing bigger buildings in the town center, that we're not just saying a sidewalk width, but looking at these parts of a streetscape that are important. I'd also say that, and I think it's in, I had some more notes on the presentation. One thing is to say in our experiences that when we see the big buildings come in, a lot of times they're trying to build right to the lot line. And that one thing they always ask for is a right-of-way reduction. And I think that when we question it, the response is, well, we don't want to widen the road. But our research shows that it's not, the right-of-way is where the street trees go and the lights and the pedestrian zones. So we're not necessarily asking to widen the road. We're asking to provide space for things that are important for these larger buildings.
Mhm.
So we tried to take a shot at, in this proposed language, to build on what we have. We think we have a lot of good things in place. Some communities have a community-wide context zones. We kind of view this proposal as an interim step using the existing height option overlays. So that's going to cover big buildings and in the town center zone. So it's not going to cover
Yes.
areas outside of it. And maybe we look at that in the future, but it's trying to take the strategies that are in the comprehensive plan and addressing what we've seen with some bigger buildings and carry that forward, that, some of the issues or results we saw.
Very good.
I think it's well thought out. I do have one question though.
Sure.
Sorry, I know it's like 8
Just
o'clock,
one.
but I have a question. So do you see at all how, if there's potential and how could it be resolved, a conflict with a builder that wants to build a building and the build to calculation allows for them to build up to like an 8-foot sidewalk. I don't know, I'm making it up, right? Like, because of where the other buildings are. And then, but they're in town center, so that's saying 12 to, it's tiny. 12 to 8, the total width, it's like 12 to 18, okay. I can still see a little bit. So how often do you think that conflict could end up happening, and how can something like that be resolved?
So these are the guidelines, and these come from ITE standards manuals for complete streets. It's not a static line. We almost would rather see it's like 12 to 18 feet. So portions of it are 12 feet. There's, as Jim said, bump outs where there's other activity areas. And you're seeing the steps of the building come in this diagram down and into it. So we kind of think that the guidelines should be there. It should be that we're addressing not just the sidewalk width, but especially room for street trees to grow and lights to be put in. The guidelines are there. I would say if we looked at the big buildings right now, there's a couple of them that are probably less than what the 8 feet that you're talking about, or just there. But the ones we're seeing tend to be like 10 feet or 11 feet, but they're not including a lot of the, they're still somewhat narrow in certain areas to allow mature trees to grow or activity. So I think it's really setting ranges for them to try and achieve. And I think they're already doing it in some cases, but I think that there's a couple out there that it's just the sidewalk and there's the curb, and you only have about 7 feet and you're looking at a 60-foot building. It's pretty daunting.
And
we're trying to get past that.
And every developer and every development is different. And that's the whole point of the planning commission. And we've outlined, or the zoning and current ordinances outline requirements that are overlaid on each piece of property. Those developers come in there. We're not trying to take or handcuff them with those. It's just that as we're reviewing these, and they have a lot of requirements, whether it's impervious coverage or green space or rec space or public space or whatever it might be, that they're incorporating into their overall developments. But this lays out an expectation. So when the architects and engineers are looking at that site and they're able to review this and they're kind of digesting, this is what we're looking for. And when they come in with a proposal, we're hoping it's more aligned to our expectations. So when someone says build to line, what's that mean? And so we're trying to, it's already defined, but we've clarified even more so. It's built to and might be 300 feet on either side of the property, and it's your block. It's not one that's on the other side of town or one that you like or something. So it gives some criteria that we're able to then have a little bit of footing to stand on, to talk to them about what we're trying to do or why we're trying to do it. But like all developments and all presentations, there's always room for that conversation. And so that's what we're trying to give ourselves, is at least an equal basis or a level basis for these things to take place. We think it's important in that, especially with those taller buildings, to not only have that build to, but also talk about why. And that's where it spills over into that sidewalk area. So we can use 123 Market as an example of a building that's right up to the sidewalk. As you're walking on that sidewalk, it's pretty close. It would be great if there was some relief and some step backs or even some sizable trees.
Kind of, that's where my question, let's say 123 was being built today. It is in line with everything else on the block, right? For the most part. So it does, like, how, if it does that, bless you. If it does that, then the sidewalk, I don't know how wide that sidewalk is, but how do you then say, if they're okay to build to that line based off of the fact that it aligns with everything else, how do you then go back and say, but we need actually a little more space because we want some trees and we want some space for the pedestrians to walk? How do we enforce that, if you will?
Well, I think, again, like Tom said, there's a right of way line that already established. So there's three of them or three different 60, 50, 40 in the borough, depending on the type of road, whether it's our local, arterial, or so on. That's going to establish at least a point we have. We'll use that. I didn't really look at 120. I just brought that up as a subject. So it didn't mean in any bad way, but the immediate adjacent building to the east is what, 30, 40 feet back, sits back in that hole there. So not that it's good or bad. I'm just saying is, as an
Tattoo
example,
place.
as an example, from a discussion standpoint, if we had looked at a range, I'm not saying they would or would not, but it would have given the opportunity to say, hey, could we provide some relief there? Could we, still, so I'm not saying we would or would not. It's just that this is, at least is addressing it or looking at it.
I think the other thing is it's in line based on the front yard setback, but it's different based on the height of the building. So it's the buildings around it are lower. They don't have the same impact on the streetscape. So trees might be able to grow easier there. But when you build a building, a much larger building, and you're trying to maintain a pedestrian scale, a lot of times you push that building back, even if it's not in line. For instance, the transit center or the Justice Center, those buildings are really big buildings, but they're set back off the street and they don't give you that same impression that this is such, I mean, if you're far away, it seems like a big building, but when you're walking down in between those
sidewalk.
buildings, the fact that they're set back somewhat diminishes how tall they are.
I hear you, and I'm sorry I'm belaboring it, but I also know when we gave people an opportunity to make a choice for parking, they made the lowest common denominator choice to make the biggest building as possible, right?
Sure.
So my question mark in my head is, will this go out the window when builders come in and they say, well, this is the build to line, I can build to here. Sorry, I can't do this, but I'm hitting your build to line that you asked for. Like that's where I'm,
Well,
like-
if they're consistent with what we're asking for, then there's not a problem. So it's when they go beyond that, that's been, where the discussions has gone into a back and forth with no real standing. We're trying to give it a little bit of standing, that's all.
I think
Is
they
that-
can meet the build to line. They can meet that one standard by pulling the building up, but then they'd have trouble meeting the other standards that the boroughs in their comprehensive plan saying we need to have these guidelines in place to protect the streetscapes that are there. So yes, they can meet the one requirement. They could pull a building right up to there, but then they wouldn't be able, I don't know how they would satisfy it unless they step the upper floors back quite a bit and do different things, or step part of the building in while some of the building comes up to match the adjacent ones. So we've seen that too, where part of it follows the line of the other buildings, but then it goes in for an entryway or a courtyard or, those things could help address some of these things that we're talking about. I think the important thing is the build to lines for all buildings in the neighborhood conservation and the town center district. These additional ones are only for buildings that are going up to 60 feet or 75 feet. And for those reasons, we need to address the goals and strategies of the comprehensive plan is introduce different requirements for them to meet.
All right, Sally, I see you out there. How are you feeling about this? Enforceable? You think it'll work for your team? That's not under you? Well, okay, so is that under you? Maybe I used the wrong words. Is that under you? Okay. Okay, so how do you feel about this and that person working with us?
I think what would help is, I mean, we put 7 pages together, and I think it would be helpful just to kind of walk your way through it because it's kind of self-explanatory. It shows what's existing in the ordinance, and as an example, we've highlighted and underlined what we've revised. So if we've taken out or added a word or a definition, that's highlighted on yours. So I think when you walk through it, they're baby steps. They're actually quite small additions from a standpoint of what we're doing. So it's not a radical departure. There are options that some municipalities take. As an example, they can call it a setback or a front yard setback line. It's 10 feet or 50. They set a hard number. What we're trying to do is still maintain that flexible approach that is consistent with the existing ordinance, which allows that flexibility and allows the design team to kind of take a look contextually of what's going on with the property and allow their building to address that. So it does give some flexibility. So in the case where a developer feels very strongly that they want to be outside of that, it's not impossible for them to come in and say, no, this is what we're proposing, and this is why we're proposing it for consideration. So it's not at all. So I think when we've gotten into areas where there's blocks that are just inconsistent with urban blocks, and they're adjacent to some of the developments. And when you do that, you don't have that same grounded, that first example that we showed where both buildings were ideally located 20 feet back from the sidewalk or whatever. It's not like that's always the case. That would be too simple. But that's literally why we're reviewing and having the conversations with them. They're proposing something, the zoning officer, the code official is looking at and making sure it's compliant as it moves forward. And then when it goes beyond us, then it goes in for either variances or waivers or whatever they might be, depending on what it is.
All right. Any comments, questions from those that are here in attendance? All right, so you're good with it? You're good with it? So we move this to discussion for the work session then?
Sure.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think that's it. We are adjourned at 8:15. Thank you.